Perfect. As for more broad multimedia services, you can also catch us on Instagram at Dodgy Punts, which is also our YouTube handle where you see the Dodgy Punts, Just the Tips edition, which features a lot of good fun, about 20-25 minutes of confidence points chaos on a weekly basis, along with occasionally some hot clips out of our main show. That all being said,
yes,
we may have a hot clip to roll straight into here, Liam, because we do need to talk about the Tribunal. And this has been a very interesting week. Now, let's separate the facts from the fan emotions here.
It's been an interesting fortnight, Jesse. We can roll in last. We can roll in old Paul Isaac into this as well, but we'll proceed.
So we need to caveat this first of all by saying that everyone who has a player involved in a Tribunal accident is going to have an agenda. And they're probably going to be either very cross that their player was injured and the assailant did not get more weeks, or that their player is the one that did said offending and got too harsh of a penalty. Tribunals are inherently riddled with that bias from fan bases. That's just how it is. Football fans are passionate people. They're advocating for their club. No dilemmas there. Now, I can confidently say, Lem, we don't really have a dog in this fight this weekend, nor last weekend for that matter.
Correct.
So we can kind of look at this, I guess, more logically and actually talk through the incidents and see where we stand on them. Because I feel like there was a bit of a discrepancy in my view, in my personal view, between the actual incidents on the football field and what was dished out as punishment on more than one occasion based on the current match review rulings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well...
Let's start...
Please. No, go on. I insist. Proceed.
Let's start with Charlie Cameron, because this is potentially the most controversial one, certainly in terms of name recognition. So Charlie Cameron has received a 3-week ban for his tackle on Liam Duggan in the Brisbane West Coast game on Sunday. We're going to try to do this in a bit more of a structured format. So first of all, suspension, yes or no?
For me, that particular tackle, no suspension. And the reason being is that it was just a tackle. It was a tackle that happened to have there wasn't any real force or malice. There was no swinging action to it. It was just a tackle. And it just so happened that in that action, Duggan's head hit the floor. That happens sometimes in football. It's a contact sport at the end of the day. If we're going to start handing out fines for every time someone gets done, which is not true, because if you look back 1 week, someone was concussed. Zerk Thatcher concussed Norton, and he didn't get nothing. So it's not about concussions. It's not about concussions. It's about the action, and that action wasn't suspendable, in my opinion. Jesse, your thoughts?
I agree, and I'm going to play devil's advocate in a second, but I agree based on what you've said. I said that, to me, that is a correct tackling technique. I don't have any real issues with what Cameron's done there. Yes, Charlie goes in like a bull ant who's just discovered Sprite no sugar in his little mat and would really like to have some. But he really, I just don't think that's a particularly nasty incident. I mean,
no.
I understand that being brought to the match review panel on the basis that Duggan was concussed. I'm okay with that. But 3 weeks to me does seem overtly harsh.
Huge.
Playing devil's advocate, though, considering Brad Shepherd is about to sue the AFL, the West Coast Football Club, and 2 of West Coast Football Club's doctors for medical negligence during the latter stages of his career, is concussion equals suspension now almost needed from the AFL if they're that desperate to stamp out concussions, noting that A, this is a contact sport, and B, some concussions are either unavoidable or completely unlucky?
Well, okay, if you take that argument then, that every time someone goes up for a pack mark, every time someone goes for a contest and they clash heads, do they both get suspended because they both got concussions? Like, is Lockie Schultz going to get a suspension for concussing himself because he hits his head into someone else? Like, suspending for a concussion doesn't seem like how it's meant to kind of be adjudicated, right? Devil's advocate, like you said, concussions are a major and important thing to be focusing on in this sport. And obviously we've come leaps and bounds since the dark ages. Well, not really, but the 70s, 80s and 90s where, no one gave a shit.
Wouldn't you be feeling nostalgic?
I'd be very, very nostalgic watching old, Dermot running his elbow through someone's head, in the early 90s, watching John Worsfold just run and just kill somebody on the field. And, It's completely fine. That's what they did back then. We've come a
Oh,
long way
Deez,
since then.
stop punching people, you silly goose.
What's he like? What's he actually like? But if it's going to be a case of like concussion equals suspension, it's going to be a shit show. It's not going to work. Like, I agree, the suspension for the action is warranted, right? So I'm not too sure if the did I write his name down? I can't remember which game it was in. I'm pretty sure it was the Gold Coast game. I think it was.
You think of Alex Davies?
Yeah. No. Alex Davies should definitely get something. Did he get? Surely he would have got something, right? Or we'll get to him.
We're getting to him.
We'll get into him. No, there was another kid who ran past and just chucked his elbow out and grazed someone's head as he walked past, as he ran past, completely like out of the blue, off the ball. Didn't have to happen. That kind of stuff, yes, suspendable. I'm not too sure if it did because he didn't really get him, but the action was there, right? Action causing concussion, negligent action causing concussion. I would say, let's talk suspensions. Anything that's a correct tackle or adjudicated to be a correct tackle, like I think Charlie's was, handing out a 3-week suspension for that is, I'm not too sure what else he's meant to do there other than gently wrap him up and nuzzle him to sleep, on the floor. That's where it's going to be heading if that's what it's going to be. Concussion, suspension, tackle's going to go pretty quickly out of the game, you would see.
There does feel like there's a disincentive to tackle, which is where we get into Toby Bedford and Tim Taranto in the GWS Richmond game. Now, in my view, I think this is potentially less of a suspension than Cameron's was, and yet here we are with 3 weeks. So Bedford is chasing Taranto, tackles him, and in a driving motion, they go to ground. Now, to go back to our old way of the way we started doing this, Lamb's suspension, yes or no?
This one I can more get on board with the suspension because the action is there, right? Okay. So the action that they've been talking about from the beginning of the season, like that kind of slinging action where there's no protection and you're kind of taking them to the ground and their head hits the ground. There's shades of this in Bedford's.
Okay.
Is it 3 weeks worth? Probably not. But they've also set that precedent early on in the season where it's like, well, what do you do with that? So even though I don't think there was much in that particular tackle in terms of like the force of how the tackle was laid, I'm more willing to give that one leeway in terms of a suspension than I would Charlie's. What are your thoughts, Jesse?
I see where you're coming from, and I don't disagree. I don't think your take on that is wrong. I'm purely of the opinion that neither should really be suspensions. Bedford's I'd maybe accept a fine, but to me, it does speak to this disincentive to tackle. And I don't want this to be a case of, back in the good old days. I don't want it to be one of those narratives. I want it to be an actual, genuine good faith conversation about what the sport looks like in 10 years' time.
Yeah, and that's the thing, though. Like, if there is a huge kind of asterisk around the tackle, if this keeps kind of going the way it's going. And that's not a case of the good old days. That's the case of what it is now versus what it's going to be. And and this is being completely hyperbolic. It's like it's not going to be like this. But I have visions of them having little tags on their jersey, and you have to try and grab the tag, and that's a tackle. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not going to get that bad, obviously, but that's how they'll spin it. And by them, I mean me just now.
Well, look, I mean, I don't think we're going to get quite to the point of touch football, but it certainly does mean we're changing the dynamics of what the game looks like. And in some ways that is needed, I think. But to me, the real danger, which is the sling tackle and the deliberate slinging motion into ground, that seems to be mostly going.
Who was it? There was, I think it was Jeremy Cameron on Dacos on Friday night, where Jeremy Cameron just grabbed Dacos by the scruff of the neck and just threw him into the ground, right? Like, that is it looked amazing. And you're looking at that going, God, he's a bull, isn't he, Jeremy? Because Dacos was okay. But if that had gone like just a little bit wrong and Dacos had hit his head or something like that, Jezza would be done. He'd be getting a lot of weeks because of the dangerous nature of it, right?
Yeah.
But that's kind of where the focus has to be. The dangerous nature, not the result, a lot of the times. And sometimes those two things correlate. But at the end of the day, like, if you're going to lay a tackle and the person just happens to concuss themselves, you can get a concussion just from impact. You didn't have to hit your head on anything. You can get a concussion from impact. So, touchy, dicey, tightrope walking.
3 weeks also went the way of Alex Davies up on the Gold Coast when they took on Port Adelaide. He got 3 weeks for a pretty, I'll be generous and say clumsy attempt to play the ball on Lockie Jones. It wasn't great, I didn't think.
No, it wasn't great, but he could have broken that kid's neck. He could have broken that kid's neck because his head was down and he went full force into his head and neck area when it was compacted. Like, we've seen some pretty hefty suspensions handed out this season. To me, that should have been up there. That should have been like a fiver at least, because if that's we can't keep coming back to it. If this is the thing you're trying to get rid of, get out of the game, head-high contact, maybe putting a bit more thought into these things. Like, you're seeing players nowadays, if people are leading into them with their heads, they're stopping and then they're tackling them like around the waist and taking them down that way. I can't remember who it was, but there was an example of it in the Freo Hawks game on the weekend where
I think it was Cox.
It was Cox. Yeah, it was because he's a smart player. He's very calm. He's very chill. Sometimes too calm, sometimes too chill. But like in that particular instance, the player head was down and he stopped and then readjusted for that tackle. He didn't just go, heads on. Now, Davies is a young kid, although he looks like a young kid. He looks like he hasn't been around the traps for very long. And, he'll hopefully learn from that, because he was just very he looked keen. Like, he looked really keen to kind of impact and put his position on the ball. But in that same notion, you've still got to put into perspective the head, protecting the head, all that kind of stuff. Like, when I saw that live, I was like, oh, that kid's going to get done for a long time. So I'm very surprised to hear it got the same as the other two. No.
Well, that's my issue.
Yeah.
That's my issue, is that you cannot possibly look at this and then look at the other two and say these are the same
comparable
in terms of. Yeah, I really don't like that. That's a big problem for me, and I think that's something that I think a lot of fans would probably agree with in that regard, is that you're comparing apples to oranges, you're assigning them the same value when the apple is significantly heavier than the two oranges were.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's my problem with that. We'll finish off as well with a 1-week suspension for Malcolm Rosas Jr. for striking Logan Evans. That was the incident you were referring to before, Liam.
Yeah, that's the one.
Very cynical elbow. 1 week. Look, it was intentional, low impact. I get why that's 1 week. I think Malcolm is rather fortunate that he didn't manage to extend that elbow any further.
I think the Tribunal needs to have a new category, intentional and stupid. Because that was probably
I agree with that, actually.
That would where it would fall into, because that was dumb. I was watching that and I was just like, what's he doing? Like, that was like one of those like stupid like brain fades, those snaps that you just like, it's almost like, he's gone back to his past ancestors who used to just throw elbows on the footy field. It's, oh fuck, get it out there. It's like almost automatic. But but that's good that it's getting 1 week though, because even though it wasn't massive contact, that's what they want to get out. So that's fine. But no, I do agree that Davey should have got much more than the other two. Like, Charlie Cameron should not have got 3.
No.
Like, Bedford maybe 1, maybe 2. I agree with you on that. Like, something though because of the action. But listen, they're not having a great run. I mean, you look at Heaney's not getting overturned last week. Look, and we aren't Sydney apologists or sympathisers by any stretch of the imagination. But that was stupid. That was very stupid. I
did not like that decision at all.
Very stupid. So dumb, especially with the precedent. Remember the word this week. The precedent that was there for earlier that week, and for it to not to be turned over. I'm pretty sure they went into that appeal with like 6 or 7 different bits of precedent to go on and say nothing. Why this 1 week? My favourite thing was in the crowd at the SCG against North Melbourne Saturday morning or afternoon in Sydney. Someone just had a sign of the crowd. One sign. It was very simple. What if it was Dacos? It's a good question.